Some stories you carry for years before you ever tell them. You replay them in the shower, in traffic, in those quiet moments right before sleep. You think about what you should have said, what you wish you'd done sooner. And eventually, if you're lucky, you get to tell the ending. This is one of those stories. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I spent 11 years building a life with someone I thought I knew, and then I spent 18 months very, very carefully taking it back. Let's start from the beginning. Chapter 1. The perfect setup. I met Dana when we were both 26. She was funny, sharp, the kind of person who made every room feel more alive the moment she walked in. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, and married in a small ceremony in my parents' backyard. We were happy, or at least I was. Dana came from money, but had complicated feelings about it. Her parents were wealthy in the old-fashioned, judgmental way. They had opinions about everything: where we should live, what careers we should pursue, when we should have children. Dana spent most of our early marriage trying to prove something to them, and I supported her through all of it. What I didn't know was that I was also being auditioned. About 3 years into our marriage, we bought a house. Not just any house, a beautiful old Victorian in a neighborhood we'd both always loved. 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch that caught the evening light perfectly. We scraped together every penny we had, my savings, some money I'd inherited from my grandmother, and a loan we worked incredibly hard to qualify for. The down payment was $74,000. I contributed $61,000 of it. Dana contributed the rest. Her parents contributed nothing, though they had plenty of opinions about the neighborhood. That house was mine in every way that mattered. I painted every room. I refinished those floors on my hands and knees over 2 weekends. I planted the garden. I fixed the leaky pipes in the basement, learned basic electrical work for the first time at age 31, and spent 3 summers slowly restoring the porch to its original condition. Dana mostly watched, occasionally helped, and regularly reminded me that her name was also on the deed. Which it was. I made sure of that. Because I loved her. Because we were partners. Because that's what you do when you're building a life with someone. I had no idea what she was planning. Chapter 2. The cracks. By year 8 of our marriage, things had shifted in ways I couldn't fully name at the time. Dana had gone back to work after a few years of freelancing, landing a senior role at a marketing firm downtown. The job was good for her. She was talented and driven, and the work energized her. But it also brought her back into a social world I wasn't really part of. Late evenings. Work trips. Team dinners that ran until midnight. I told myself I wasn't suspicious. I told myself I trusted her. I told myself the distance between us was just the natural settling of a long marriage, the way 2 people could love each other and still sometimes feel like strangers. I was lying to myself. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. She stopped asking about my day. She started taking her phone to the bathroom. She got defensive about small things: who'd called, where she'd been, why she was 20 minutes later than she'd said. She started referencing a coworker named Brendan with a casual frequency that didn't feel casual at all. The night I actually found out, I wasn't even snooping. I'd borrowed her laptop to look up a restaurant. Mine was upstairs, and hers was right there on the kitchen counter, already open. I wasn't looking for anything. But the email thread was right there, open in a tab, and the subject line read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." I sat very still for a very long time. Then I closed the laptop, went upstairs, got into bed, stared at the ceiling, and made a decision. I was not going to react. Not yet. Chapter 3. The education here's something nobody tells you about discovering your spouse is cheating. The temptation to explode is enormous and almost always the wrong move. I'd seen friends go through this. Confrontations that turned into screaming matches, doors slammed, things said that couldn't be unsaid, important documents shredded in rage, bank accounts cleaned out, divorces that dragged on for years because both people came in swinging and neither knew what they actually had. I didn't want that. I wanted to be smart. So for the next 3 weeks, I did nothing except gather information and educate myself. I found a divorce attorney, not just any attorney, one who specialized in contested asset cases. Her consultation fee was $400 and worth every cent. She walked me through exactly how property division worked in our state, what documentation I'd need, what my rights were, and crucially what I needed to do and not do before filing. I pulled together every financial document I could find, bank statements going back 5 years, tax returns, the mortgage paperwork, records of my grandmother's inheritance, which I'd been careful to keep in a separate account before we put it toward the house. Receipts for every major improvement I'd made to the property. I'd always kept them, organized in labeled folders, half out of habit and half out of a vague sense that they might matter someday. Turns out they mattered enormously. I also, quietly, started moving money. Not hiding it, my attorney was very clear about what would and wouldn't hold up in court, but I closed a joint savings account that we rarely used and moved my portion into a personal account, well documented and disclosed. I stopped adding to the joint checking beyond what was needed for household bills. And I waited. I needed to understand what Dana's plan was before I showed her mine. Because I had started to suspect based on certain conversations I'd overheard, certain phone calls she'd taken in the car, certain Saturdays spent at her parents' house without me, that Dana wasn't just having an affair. Dana was planning an exit, and she wanted to do it on her terms, on her timeline, in a way that would leave her with as much as possible. I wasn't going to let that happen. Chapter 4. What she was planning, it took me a while to piece it together completely, but eventually the picture became clear. Dana and Brendan had been seeing each other for approximately 8 months. He was also going through a divorce messy, from what I understood, involving young kids and a lot of bitterness. Dana, apparently, saw their future together as a kind of fresh start, a new relationship, a new life, and crucially, a new home. Our home. I learned this through a combination of things I shouldn't have seen and a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. The version Dana had apparently shared with her mother overheard while I was in the kitchen and she was on the back porch went something like this. She would file for divorce. She would argue that the house was jointly owned and that her contributions to the household, she had done laundry and cooked dinner, which I genuinely appreciated. But let's be clear about the financial picture here. Entitled her to half its value at minimum, and she would buy out my share at a low appraisal she'd already quietly arranged using money her parents had promised to lend her. She and Brendan would move in together. The house I had poured years of my life and most of my financial history into would become their love nest. She had a timeline. She had a plan. She had her parents' money lined up. What she didn't have was a lawyer as good as mine. Chapter 5. The filing I filed first. My attorney had advised me to do this, and to do it on a Thursday. Thursdays are quiet days, she said. Less chaos. Things get processed faster. I don't know if that's actually true or just superstition, but I followed her advice. The papers were served to Dana on a Friday afternoon at her office. I know because my process server confirmed it at 3:47 p.m. I know what time I received that confirmation because I was sitting in my attorney's office when it came through, and I remember looking at my phone and feeling something I can only describe as a door closing. Not grief, not satisfaction, just finality. The beginning of the end. Dana called me 4 times in the next 2 hours. I didn't answer. She texted, "We need to talk." I replied, "Please contact my attorney." And then I drove home to the house I had built with my own hands, made myself dinner, and sat on the porch I had spent 3 summers restoring and watched the sun go down. It was a beautiful evening. Chapter 6. The fight. What followed was 6 months of the most exhausting, expensive, and emotionally draining experience of my life, and also, eventually, one of the most clarifying. Dana hired an attorney. A good one. Actually, I'll give her credit for that. His strategy was exactly what I'd anticipated. Argue that the house was a marital asset, minimize the significance of my disproportionate financial contribution, and push for an even split. My attorney's counter-strategy was built on documentation. We had the bank records showing that $61,000 of the down payment came from my personal accounts, including $30,000 directly traceable to my inheritance. We had 5 years of home improvement receipts totaling over $40,000 in materials alone, not counting labor. We had property tax records, insurance payments, and mortgage statements showing that I had made the majority of payments throughout our marriage, while Dana's income largely went to personal spending, and we discovered occasional gifts to Brendan that she hadn't disclosed. We also, and this was significant, had evidence of the low appraisal she'd quietly arranged. My attorney moved to have the property independently appraised, which came in $38,000 higher than Dana's version. That maneuver alone changed the math of the entire negotiation. Dana's attorney pushed hard. There were depositions. There were uncomfortable conversations about finances, about the affair, about the timeline of when things had gone wrong. Dana cried in one session, and I sat across the table from her and felt mostly tired. I had loved her. I had genuinely loved her. And she had looked me in the eye every day for nearly a year while planning to take the most valuable thing I owned and hand it to another man. That was hard to sit with. But I sat with it. Chapter 7. The settlement. We settled out of court, which I had always expected we would. These things rarely go all the way to trial. The settlement was not what Dana had planned. She received her share of our joint bank accounts, which by the time we settled was not large. She received some furniture and personal property she'd requested. She received a cash payment of $22,000, representing her proportional contribution to the down payment, and her equity share, calculated fairly and with full documentation. She did not receive the house. I bought out her share at the independently appraised value. My attorney had structured the settlement so that my inheritance contribution and disproportionate improvement expenditures were clearly factored into the equity calculation. Dana's parents, who had promised to loan her money for a buyout of me, found themselves instead watching their daughter walk away with a fraction of what she'd expected. Last I heard, Brendan's own divorce had gotten complicated. The fresh start Dana had imagined was proving harder to construct than she'd planned. I don't take pleasure in that. Not exactly. Chapter 8. The porch. The first night after the settlement was finalized, I sat on the porch again. It was late October by then, and the air had that particular cool sharpness that comes just before the leaves finish turning. I had a glass of something, I don't even remember what, and I sat in the chair I'd bought at an estate sale 4 years earlier and refinished myself, and I looked out at the garden I'd planted, and the street I'd spent a decade watching, and the neighborhood I'd chosen. It didn't feel like victory. Not quite. It felt more like the moment after a long storm, that strange stillness, the air cleaned out, everything a little raw. I had spent almost a year being afraid of losing the house, afraid of what the process would cost me emotionally and financially, afraid of who I'd be on the other side of it. And here I was, on the other side of it, still here. Still in the house, still myself, more or less. I thought about my grandmother, whose money had helped build this place. She had been a practical woman, not sentimental, not given to speeches. But I remembered her saying once I was maybe 12 that the most important thing you could do in any situation was refuse to be rushed. Take your time, she'd said, and people will underestimate you every time. She wasn't wrong. #epilogue. I'm writing this about 2 years after the divorce finalized. The house is mine. Fully, completely, legally mine. I've done more work on it since finally got around to the kitchen I'd been planning for years, put in a small vegetable garden in the back, replaced the roof, which needed it. I've dated a little. Nothing serious. That's fine. Dana and I don't communicate. I don't wish her ill. I don't wish her well particularly. I just don't think about her much anymore, which I understand is the truest form of moving on. The porch still catches the evening light perfectly. If you're going through something like this, if you're sitting somewhere right now, having just discovered something that's changed everything, here's what I want you to know. Don't explode. Don't disappear. Don't react before you understand what you're dealing with. Get a good lawyer. Get your documents in order. Keep your receipts for everything, always, and take your time. People will underestimate you